All right. So thank you very much once again. I don't know how many people are going to make it to our 3 o'clock recording here, but this is the second episode of the Reboot. Conversations with local and Atlantic Canadian leaders and entrepreneurs on how we can take this opportunity that the world is throwing at us and come up with some kind of plan or system and take the right steps coming out, because it is essentially a big reboot system. Um, Today, I'm really happy to have a former MP for Fundy Royal, Alaina Lockhart, going to come on and have a discussion with me. Since the fall, she's been kind of deciding what she's going to do in terms of how she can continue to help her area. Fundy Royal, very much like northern New Brunswick or all of rural New Brunswick in its own right, is very rural, very traditional industries. Traditional in a lot of sense. We had a little bit of a chat about that a little bit earlier. I'm sure we'll get into it again. But just a little bit of background on Alaina before I bring her in. She was the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of Small Business and Tourism, so definitely someone we'd like to talk to about what's going on and what might the future hold. And the Liberals are still in power, so what we can expect in terms of how that government's going to roll out post-COVID. She was first elected as a councillor of a municipality in 2004 in Norton, so very small town, very similar to my experiences in Beldoon. And recently she started a group on medium.com, seems to be their main platform, but it's spreading out, talking about roadways to sustainability in urban and rural areas in New Brunswick and how we can kind of work together to do that. So I think I have Alaina on the other screen, and she hasn't corrected me on any of the other Wikipedia facts I've just thrown out. So I'm going to bring her right in and say hi. So Alaina, thank you very much for coming on.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We actually have a couple people watching already, so that's great. So I guess is there anything else that I missed that you'd like to kind of talk to yourself about? You have a brewer. Your husband has a brewery too. I missed that one.
Right. So, you mentioned that since last October, since the last election, that I've been spending some time looking at what direction I want to go in, and that means looking behind me to see what experiences I've had and to see how to best harness those and in the words of one of my friends, use my powers for good, not evil. So, if I look back through the last 20 years or so, I have always been entrepreneurial, mentoring, working in the community, and really embracing change. And so as I look forward, I look to kind of put all of those skills and experiences together to help not only move our region forward, but to be a champion for rural communities. And having had the opportunity to serve at the federal level, I can tell you that the challenges are different. Just as there's representation from urban areas,
Yeah.
that we need to tap into the rural as well. So that's what the future looks like.
Well, and I think I was going to go in a couple different spots first, but let's just jump on that too. I think an important piece, at least in my focus, I like to focus on rural entrepreneurship because, New Brunswick's still about 60% rural. 69% of the population lives in rural, small towns, villages, unincorporated areas. But on the federal level, like I spent a little bit of time living in Edmonton, and so Don Iveson and um, you have this really strong lobby group of these big cities that seem to get a lot of attention on the federal stage. And so there's investment strategies on the infrastructure that's involved in facilitating a large city. So when we saw that first wave of spending to stimulate the economy out of the first term of Trudeau's government, the one that you were a part of, it seemed like it was geared a lot towards, the infrastructure spending was kind of towards cities. How, what have you kind of seen, and what can smaller municipalities and rural areas do to kind of band together? Because it does seem like we're almost too scattershot to have one collective voice.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is start having these conversations more broadly. I think one of the challenges for rural Canada is the fact that we don't value urban and rural communities the same. We often tend to look at urban areas as the real drivers to innovation, looking at GDP, whether it be manufacturing, resource development, retail. All of those things seem to happen in more of an urban environment, but we don't put as much value on the things that our rural regions bring to us, which are the very things that have made New Brunswick so successful in working through COVID, really.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the distance, we have clean air, we have that sense of community, that we actually care, that our seniors get through this as well. Caring for your neighbor and caring for your neighbor's grandmother has been part of been part of our COVID strategy. And we can't undervalue those. I mean, there's lots of other things from an economic standpoint. If you look at clean energy and that sort of thing, it's the rural areas that provide those.
Okay. And I think you're right. I mean, we have this wonderful, inadvertent blessing of having a sparsely populated province, and that definitely has, I don't think anybody's trying to think that we reinvented the wheel and came up with some kind of great strategy on how to beat COVID. It really did boil down to, most of us live, we've got space in between our houses. There's not, we're not getting on a massively packed subway every day to get to work. Our population is smaller. You went to work in Ottawa, a city that has a larger population than the province that you lived in. So, I mean, there were those factors that went into place. And so we do have, and we do drive innovation. I mean, I think there's been, we look at aquaculture, especially, I think in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada, we've been driving, that. And I've had conversations with Francis McGuire of ACOA and places like that, where we think that there's still going to be a significant future for Canada in the food processing or the food delivery field, because there's trust around Canadian food and the Canadian waters, and is in terms of being clean. And so how do we bring, I guess, how do we get that network of rural communities together so that we can, we have that, we're having these discussions, but do you have any idea what that looks like from, the perspective of somebody who's spent some time in Ottawa and saw how, effective lobbyists do their job?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm looking at it a little bit differently now than when I was in that role, as far as defined lobbying. I
Mm-hmm.
think, I know the objective of the Deep Change Happy Hour that we're hosting now is to really highlight the community-led innovation that is going on, and making sure that there's an opportunity for those folks to come together, to learn about what each other are doing, to share that information so that it can be duplicated, replicated, and grown, but also, like you say, coming together as a force to show that there is community-led innovation, and making sure those alternatives are brought to the table when policy is being discussed, as you so call it, the reboot, right? So let's not go back to looking at all the traditional models that might be traditionally discussed around those tables, but let's take a look at the community-led innovation that's happening. And you'll get more community engagement because people have actually benefited from that, innovation that's happened in their own communities.
Okay. And those, I mean, that's great. And it's tough to really, we're kind of almost sitting on our hands. Like we're finally having these discussions with all these great ideas, and we kind of have to, hurry up and wait a little bit, because we're still waiting for our new normal to start. I think hopefully it's not the same as before. Hopefully we're getting a little bit back. So what I'd like to talk about next, and we kind of discussed this before we hopped on the call, is just, being a small town councillor, something you can relate to as as a councillor in Norton, councillor in Beldoon. Tuesday night was my last night as deputy mayor, which I'm pretty happy that I'll never have to, be on the ready for that chair. But and now entering into the first 5-year term in a long time because of the extension. We talked a little bit about shifts in mentality and how COVID's kind of made everybody face up to the fact that, threats from the world can affect a place as small as Baldoon or Sussex. And, you know, people are really starting to take stock of, you know, these pre-held conceptions of how the world worked. What lessons do you think would you hate, given what we talked about earlier about traditional ways of thinking in our areas? What lessons would you really hate for people to leave behind and not come out of with this?
Right. Well, I think we talked about this the other day that, right now, for one thing, there's a huge movement to support local. And I think that is really important. And it is actually highlighted. You had mentioned earlier food security. People are very interested in supporting their local producers right now. I hope we don't lose that. But it is an emotional buy at this point.
Yeah.
People don't want to lose they don't want their neighbor to lose their business. They don't want their friend to lose their business. But let's look at that a little bit more systematically and say, how do we support that you know local economy? And one of the things that I talked about in my last writing about the rural urban linkages as
Yeah.
well is, what does local mean?
Hmm.
I living in a small town. Our town's quite self-sufficient. We've got pretty much all of our basic services here, and it's a great place to live. The other advantage we have is that we're within an hour's driving distance to St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton. And there's times not only that I go to the city for services, but it also has shone a light on the fact that those urban areas are relying on rural areas as well when it comes to self-sufficiency. So, whether it is looking to the farmer down the road that's in that rural area, or
Yep.
whether it is Sunday and you need to get out of the house and all of a sudden the Fundy Trail is looking really great for you and your family to go take a drive. So, we have to think when we're talking about supporting local as kind of a bigger footprint than our own little backyard.
Well, yeah, and I think I want to kind of double down, and it was your article on the linkages that I found on LinkedIn and actually caused me to reach out to you, because I thought you gave a very interesting perspective, and one that I've been trying to preach for at least the last 3 years on council, was that we need to broaden our idea of local too, right? We need to support the supply chains that function not just in our community, but also, our local grocery store. Absolutely, we need to support them, but we have to realize that we also need to support, suppliers that might, be 30 minutes down the road or outside the community. And that, given our small population, we really do have to have a nuanced approach to, what supporting local is, because that critical mass that's required to prop up any kind of rural economy is harder to get if we say, you know, only within, say, the boundaries of Baldoon, or only within the boundaries of Sussex will I spend my dime. Well, that doesn't, you know, it's a nice thought, but it doesn't really jive,
It
I
doesn't
guess.
have the ecosystem, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you look at the whole picture, there is a codependence there. And one of the things that I've seen is that there's always a fight for what's more valuable, and I
Yeah.
think we need to move to a place where we see each as equally valuable. Our urban areas
Yeah.
bring a set of attributes to the table that are very useful, and so do our rural areas. And until we start thinking about each other as full partners
Hmm.
in progress, I think we're missing opportunities. I think there's innovation happening in cities that could be translated to a rural setting, and vice versa.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that we're trying to do with the Dockyard project is to take those incubator models that you find in bigger centers and bring it into the rural settings and kind of implement that out. But the phrasing that I used when I was in doing work on our regional service commission was that we need to view the communities, neighboring communities, both urban and rural, as not adversaries, but complementary to each other. And that's the idea, is that, Beldoon has a large industrial core. We actually, for the longest time, we had the smelter closed down. We still really haven't dealt with that, but we were the employer, we were the economic engine of the area. We allowed Bathurst to survive the mines closing down, because there was still 500 good paying jobs direct employment jobs, not even counting spinoff in Beldoon. We were complementary to the life that they were leading. But if you looked at how we approach things like cultural spending, activities, farmers market, everybody had their own. Everybody had their own sports divisions or sports leagues. We couldn't even let our kids play sports together. And so it just became this, dividing an already small pie into even smaller pieces. And I think that's one of the curses we have. And we have these great uniting factors like our highways and stuff like that. And we brought in the, that you mentioned in your articles. Obviously, everybody who's not aware that follows my page, medium.com, search for Alaina, you're going to find a lot of good articles. I really like the perfect is the enemy of grid one.
Yeah, that the perfect was the enemy of good is you asked a little earlier about, what lessons do we not want to lose? And I
Yeah.
think that was one of them. I've from an entrepreneur kind of perspective, it's been great to see customers kind of meet businesses where they're at. Every business is trying to get through this the best they can. They're innovating, they're trying new things, they're changing it up, they're doing whatever they have to do. And the tolerance that I've seen from consumers has been great as well. They're accepting of that. They're willing to do that. And what's happened because that environment has existed, entrepreneurs have been able to take some risks that they maybe would have avoided doing because they wanted to get it perfect before. So this has been the perfect time to kind of launch something, see if it works out, fine tune it, and then reintroduce it later, a little bit better. So.
My 1-year-old is just waking up from his nap, but so Jack's gonna feature again in one of my broadcasts. But no, that's really good. I think you can look at. I'm just gonna mute it for a second.
Everybody's reality right now.
It's reality. I mean, we're now in a work from home scenario, and I mean it could last for a very long time. I think one of our business, my family has a few businesses, and one of them, I don't think they're ever going to go back to the office,
Right.
because
Yeah.
we found these efficiencies that we were kind of reluctant to adopt before, but now we've realized that we can actually get the work done, and we're working well together. We use tools like Zoom, and it's like we're right next to each other. I think that's a
At the
great one.
same time, I would say instances like your Jack making an appearance, it really humanizes everyone again too. So all of a sudden you're within your team, you realize that you're working with other people and they've got a life going on outside of that meeting room. And I think I think it's valuable.
Yeah. So I got to ask you one question. I know I've lost an election before, so I mean obviously not the same stage, and so obviously there's probably a little bit of regret. You kind of wish you were there to help out your colleagues right now as they kind of face one of the bigger challenges of a very long time, or since 1918.
Mhm.
How do you feel they're doing? Are you in contact with any of them? Are they handling the stress okay? Is everything going well?
Yeah, listen, the current government, well, not just the federal government, all government leaders are faced with a challenge that we just have not seen in a lifetime. And I would have to say that the one thing that's happening now that is allowing for leadership is that we're facing an issue that everybody, the general public, understands. Quite often, I saw in government that government puts forth a solution to a problem that people just didn't know existed or don't understand well enough to understand why that's being done. So the fact that as Canadians, we're all coming along with a level of understanding of what government is trying to achieve, I think has been really helpful. And as a result, the government's been able to respond and try to provide support where it can. Another thing that's been really advantageous to us in New Brunswick is our cost of living. When you look at the supports that have been put out there, the average New Brunswick family, with the support that they're receiving, whether it be provincially, federally, could shelter at home when they needed to,
Yeah,
and that's
sure.
not the same in urban areas as well. So I appreciate the diversity that they're trying to overcome and getting those supports out. And I would say that that they're feeling, the folks that I've talked to that are in government are feeling, you know, rejuvenated, or that we can all move together and we can see progress. Obviously, the priority was to stop the bleeding as far as the economy on the front end,
Mhm.
and make sure we kept our healthcare system stable. But as we move into recovery, I hope that we can continue to work together like that too.
No, that's great, and I think this whole example has kind of shown that really coming through. And when you do get the odd partisan opportunistic jab or something like that, it for right now in what is, I would say, a very polarized world, it's getting rebuked pretty fast in Canada. There's not as much patience for that, which is nice to see. um,
Well, we've got a pretty stark example as a neighbor of what happens with that polarization. And
yeah.
I'm proud to be Canadian, proud to be a New Brunswicker, and I think this has shown what we can achieve if we can move past that polarizing um, type of
No,
politics.
for sure. And I think, this kind of segues into what will be our last little topic or our conversation here, which is we were talking about kind of the traditional views of, rural municipalities and rural areas in New Brunswick. And, right now they understand. They understand, they can wrap their head around this COVID-19. They understand it's an illness, it's a flu, it can kill you. It's very communicable, and we're all pulling together. Uh, we've also talked about the need for change and the way we have perspectives about buying local and sourcing local and building businesses and entrepreneurship. Obviously, we're not hoping for a pandemic in order to let that sink in. So what can we do as entrepreneurial leaders, political leaders, or anybody who fancies themselves an agent of change to help continue to push that mentality shift that we need in order for rural communities to evolve?
I strongly believe that it's greater engagement, and I think what you're doing with this podcast, what I've been doing, working with Lisa Hrablik, and trying to create those conversations are all about that. I mean, in some ways, people feel like in the past have felt like, why bother engaging? Nobody listens anyway. And I think we've created an environment right now where people do feel like their needs are being heard, and that government is responding. And so we need to keep those conversations, those healthy conversations going, and keep the listening ears out as well. And I'm hopeful that policy will continue to respond to what communities are saying, and I think that will strengthen our democracy and help us move forward.
So beyond I agree with everything you're saying right now in terms of the engagement and pieces like that. Is there a particular piece of policy or a particular idea that you think would kind of be a catalyst that could drive that kind of engagement or democratization of opinions and innovation?
Well, I mean, I think this has been a contentious issue all along. However, I think as we move to a greener economy, I
Uh,
mean, that's another issue that has been in the past very polarizing. However, the crisis that we faced here, more and more Canadians across the country are starting to realize that they're being impacted by climate as well. And so, if we could use this model or the learnings from this model to help move that conversation forward, to make sure that we are hearing all perspectives on this, I'm hopeful that Canada can move to a greener economy as
yeah.
our next big challenge.
Well, and I'll just I couldn't let someone for that represents Fundy Royal and the Sussex area get off the phone, because my fellow counselor Nick Divenborn would hate me forever if I didn't talk to you about dairy and food security. And we already kind of mentioned that, and the green economy. My dad would also love me. He's been pitching the idea of bringing back homesteading to bring in immigration and grow our food security for years. What can our agricultural sector do in terms of growing and strategic investment that A, contributes to that greener economy, but B, helps us with food security. And give the Southern New Brunswick Sussex perspective on that, because
Sure. Well, listen, I have always been a strong believer that our folks that are working in agriculture have been innovators, forever. And I think that's often underestimated. The other thing that I would say that we can leverage right now is that all of a sudden everybody understands a little bit better where their food comes from. So I often use the example of living in Ottawa and going to the grocery store, and I thought it was brilliant what they had done. When you opened the fridge for the milk, it mooed. And when you opened the fridge for the eggs, you could hear chickens. And I thought, what a great simple way to try to connect people with their food. But that we need to be proud of our farmers and supporting them and understanding their businesses a little bit better and what they bring to our local economies, as well as the part they play in food security. So I think there's a lot of support there for our agriculture sector, and let's focus on the challenges that are there and keep moving forward. And New Brunswick is in a perfect position to be a leader, not only in export but in our domestic food security.
I just got a tickle in my throat, so
you want me to keep talking?
No, but that's as good of a place to end as anywhere. So exactly. Not sick anyway.
Well, I'm sorry that it ends this way, but it's been great to chat with you, and really appreciate the opportunity to dive into some of these real New Brunswick challenges.
New Brunswick challenges, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Alaina.
All right.
I
have
will
a great
talk
day.
to you later. All right. Bye. All right, guys. I'm really sorry about that, having to cut Alaina off really short there. I'm going to send her a text message and apologize profusely. Every now and again, talking too long. That's what happens. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back again, hopefully next week. Bye.